All right, everyone, we're gonna wait a couple minutes and see who logs in and maybe get started up in about 3 minutes at 5:35. So we'll wait, and again, welcome to all of you that are joining tonight. I believe you guys are all gonna be on mute, but Mark, I see that you're here. Welcome. All right, well, let's just wait a couple more minutes and then we'll get started up. All right, well, I have 5:35 on my clock, so I see we have a couple people in attendance, so we'll get started. And since it's a rather small group right now, as we're kind of going through this, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A and in the chat box, and I'll try to get to them as we're going through the slides. And then again, any questions that you have afterwards, we can always use a little bit of time there for a Q&A as well. And just as a gentle reminder, if you believe if you received your confirmation email this morning regarding the presentation, you probably got a link for the suggested $20 donation that will go to Dana-Farber and the Jimmy Fund. If you did not get that link or did not receive an email, you'll probably get a follow-up email tomorrow to make that suggested donation. All right, so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about conditioning the mind for a Grateful 26.2. And if anyone is not actually running a marathon, I know we've got the virtual Boston Marathon coming up. Everything that we're going to talk about tonight won't just help you for a Grateful 26.2 miles, but it'll help you beyond that as well. So one thing that you may have noticed if you've done a lot of running is that the heaviest burden that you carry around probably day to day and on your runs is your head. right? So a lot that goes on in your mind is going to impact how you're going to perform. And what we're going to try to do tonight is talk about a number of different strategies that can be very helpful to help you overcome those quote unquote heavy burdens that we're carrying around in our heads. So let's talk a little bit about what mental conditioning is. And just to give you a quick background about who I am, my name is Grayson Kimball, and I've been working in the sports psychology field for about 20 years. It happens to coincide with about 20 years of marathon running. The two did not line up on purpose, but as I finished my degree in sports psychology, I moved out to Boston and quickly became immersed into the world of distance running. Having never been a runner prior to that, I kind of got the bug, and lo and behold, it's been 20 years. So I've run 8 marathons, including 5 Bostons. I ran for or with Dana Farber for the 2016 Boston Marathon, which has been my most recent marathon. I've also been coaching some of the different charity teams over the years. I've done some work with team and training. I've actually been working with the Dana Farber runners, I think now for 5 years. I believe 2015 is when I started giving presentations to the group. And for the last 3 years, including this current, I've been the head coach for Team Brookline, which is a little group of 35 runners, actually made up of 5 charities in the town of Brookline. And I've been coaching them for the past 3 years. I've also run a bunch of half marathons and done a whole bunch of other things as well, but that's essentially my background. So again, I take this, again, from my own personal experiences, and then of course my professional experiences working in the field of sports psych and helping athletes of all different sports and all different ability levels. So when we want to understand what sports psychology is or what mental conditioning is, just to give you a quick review, for those of you who may have heard me speak before, I like to break it down into 3 simple words: think, feel, run. Essentially, the way you think about anything, not just running, but about anything, is going to affect how you feel. And then how you feel will affect how you perform. And how you're performing, specifically in this case, how you're running, that's going to impact that next thought, that next feeling. And this essentially becomes one big cycle. And we know the general rule of thumb: the more positive you think, the better you feel, the better you perform, the better you're thinking, etc. On the flip side, the more negative you are, the worse you're going to feel, and there's a pretty good chance that you're not going to perform as well as you would like. So think, feel, run. To me, those are 3 of the most important words when it comes to mental conditioning. And then the other piece to this is this inverted triangle. And this inverted triangle is something that I did not come up with. It actually stems from the symbol, the logo of Springfield College in Springfield, Massachusetts, where I actually did my graduate work in sports psychology. And the 3 pillars to Springfield College and the inverted triangle are spirit, mind, body. And that essentially refers to any individual, regardless of what they do, sport, etc. They need a strong spirit, a strong mind, and a strong body. And the reason why the triangle is on its apex is if any of these 3 are a little out of whack, that triangle may topple over. And so what I was taught in my graduate program was to really learn how to develop, again, a strong mindset, a strong body, and have a strong spirit. So a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight really hits upon that premise. So mindset. Mindset is a huge factor when it comes to peak performance. So how do we respond to situations? Well, it depends on what type of mindset you have. So there's been a lot of research on the growth mindset, which I'm sure some of you might be familiar with. And what is the growth mindset? What is the fixed mindset? So a lot of this, again, kind of came out of the research of Dr. Carol Dweck, who is a psychologist. She has a book actually called Mindset. Great book. Gives you some really cool insights, not just from a growth mindset from an athletic standpoint, but just from a life standpoint. But how we essentially apply this to sport and specifically to runners. What's the fixed mindset? Well, the fixed mindset is essentially you have a closed mind. So you're basically shut off. You have a very strong inability to make changes when things aren't going well. And how does one unfortunately develop that fixed mindset? It actually stems from repeated success and repeated failure. And so that may seem a bit of a misnomer. Well, how could success actually lead to a closed mindset, a fixed mindset? And the way that works is that if all you have really achieved is success, the first time you're hit with failure, you don't know how to cope with it. And on the flip side, if all you've basically experienced, let's say as a runner or a golfer or a cyclist, is failure, not living up to your expectations, not meeting goals, etc., if all you've experienced is essentially repeated failure, well, what happens when you actually succeed? Again, you don't believe it, or you attribute it to luck. Why? Because it's never really happened to you. So you actually develop that fixed or that closed mindset. The growth mindset, which is where we all like to be, that's more of the open mindset, meaning we're always trying to improve. We learn from our mistakes and we learn from our successes. So if you're on a run, no pun intended, right now, just, hey, all my races have been really strong, again, prior to the COVID shutdown, I haven't had injuries, like just everything feels really good. That's great, but learn from those successes. And if you've had some setbacks, learn from those setbacks as well. And that will help us develop that growth mindset. And that'll really help you achieve your potential, whatever your potential may be. And that actually segues perfectly into our next topic, which is how do we achieve our actual potential? So the way you actually perform, you go out, again, for some of you that might be doing the virtual Boston Marathon. What's going to happen that day? What is your actual performance going to be like? Well, your actual performance is going to be equal to two really important factors: your potential minus what we call your individual faults. So what is potential performance? What are individual faults? Well, potential performance, if everything were to go smoothly, you have the potential to do what? Well, based off my experiences, based off my current training, I have the potential to run a sub 4-hour marathon. Okay, that's great. But we also have to take into consideration individual faults, right? So what could be a individual fault? Well, I'm kind of dealing with a little knee injury going on, or kind of my calf seems to be getting tight, or I'm running really well, but the weather's been conducive for me. What happens if on marathon day, it's, 38 degrees and driving rain like we had a couple of years ago? Or again, this virtual marathon is going to be in September. And while we hope, that the weather, might be a nice, picturesque fall day, what if it's 87 degrees, right? That's really hot. And well, maybe you've trained through that, but you probably didn't train 26 miles, right? You probably capped at 18 or 20 miles. So again, how are you going to handle that? So you want to be mindful of what you can realistically achieve, and also be mindful of what may prevent you from achieving your potential. So if we can kind of catch ourselves, okay, well, I know it's going to be hot, so here's what I can do so I can maybe minimize those faults that might take away from my potential, which may then actually take away from my actual performance. And this little formula right here stems way back to the early 1970s. There was a researcher in psychology, I believe his name was Ivan Steiner, and he came up with this model of actual performance and potential performance. So there is a lot of research to actually back up the potential minus the individual faults. And of course, this theory applies to teams as well. But again, we're talking about individual sports, and it mirrors that really, really well. So assuming we can actually achieve our performance, achieve our potential performance and actually have a successful day out there, One psychological construct that we always kind of, lean towards, but it's hard to actually explain, is called psychological momentum, right? What is psychological momentum? It's basically increased confidence during periods of what we call perceived psychological momentum. And the key word here is perceived. In your mind, you feel like things are going your way. Maybe like in the other team's mind or another runner's mind, they have that perception that things are not going my way. So there's an apparent shift in what you deem as good fortune or good luck, right? Or bad fortune and bad luck. Everything seems to go right for you. So it's like, okay, that momentum is pushing me this way. Or everything seems to be going wrong. So the definition of psychological momentum in the sports psychology literature is defined as a positive or negative change in cognition, so the way we think, our affect, how we're feeling, our physiology, just our body actually responds differently, and our behavior, how we actually act out there. So changes in cognition, affect, physiology, and behavior caused by an event or a series of events. So one thing might happen and that momentum changes, or multiple things happen and that momentum changes for the good or for the bad, and that will result in a shift in performance, right? And possibly your actual competitive outcome. So what's the model here? So we have what's called a precipitating event, right? Something happens, and again, usually, hopefully it's a confidence trigger, and that will lead to that momentum shift. Now, what are some of the factors that play a role in how you're going to respond? The big one is your experience, right? So is this the first time you've ever run a marathon? Is this the 10th time you've run a marathon? Your experience will help you handle some of these momentum triggers, right? So again, the more experienced you are, the more likely you're going to possess the skills to take advantage of this precipitating event. Oh yeah, when that happens, I can kind of jump right on that, really changes things for me, off I go. Versus, I've never really been in this situation before, oh my God, that just happened. And of course, you may not be able to mobilize against negative momentum. So let's look at a quick example, and we're going to just apply this to a marathon runner. In terms of how they may deal with this shift in momentum. So let's say you're 8 miles into the marathon and things just don't feel right. And by the way, Rob, I do see your question and I will get to that momentarily. So you're 8 miles in and just things feel off, right? You need some type of momentum shift. So perhaps you see a few friends at mile 8, and that puts a smile on your face. So that's that precipitating event. Something just happened. Now, what do you do about that event? Well, here's where your experience comes into play. You've run a marathon before. You know that there are ebbs and flows. Very rarely from mile 1 to 26 is everything just absolutely perfect, right? Things are going to pop up. So you have that experience, right? You know that there are going to be some changes. And you see your friends, puts a smile on your face. That increases confidence. That leads to more positive affect, right? Appropriate attention. You're now focused more on you, more balanced physiologically, right? Your intensity is where you need it to be, right? You can kind of monitor your pace, better. Spike in confidence, spike in mood. Basically, a noticeable change in effort, body language, performance, right? So you use that precipitating event to actually help change your psychological momentum. So from that point on, you literally think your way to the finish line. Yes, physically you're running out there, but again, you're thinking your way to the finish line. And that basically can change the whole trajectory that you were on, based on how you felt at mile 8. At mile 8, you were thinking, this is not my day. But again, you see the friends, you see the smiles, changes everything. boom, you're off. So again, we want to utilize these momentum triggers. So some common momentum triggers for runners, right? Encouragement, support. You see the right people at the right time changes everything, right? You feel like you're running strong miles. Okay, I started out, kind of sluggish today, but those last couple miles, I finally hit my groove, boom, I'm off, right? Positive attitude, that growth mindset, right? Perceived success, past experiences. I've been through this before. I know how to handle things. Being familiar with the course, right? One of the benefits of running Boston is we train on the Boston Marathon course. So again, you just want to recognize these events or these momentum triggers and use it to your benefit. Now, before we move on to the next slide, I just want to answer one of the questions here from Rob. Hi, Grayson. What about those days when you go out for a run and just feel awful, lead legs, no stamina, even after feeling great on a prior run? Great question. So, again, this actually kind of stems back to think, feel, perform. You control how you think. You control how you feel. You control how you run or how you perform. So when you think about, maybe my legs feel heavy. Well, okay, how am I still going to get through the run today? Maybe I'm going to slow my pace down a little bit. But even more specifically, what's my goal today? And what will happen is if somebody doesn't feel right when they go out, again, I just don't feel like I have stamina today. Again, the heavy legs, I felt so great 2 days ago. I just don't have it today. Well, what are you trying to achieve today? Well, I was going to go out and run 6 miles. Or, well, maybe I'll just do more of like a 3 to 4 mile speed workout today, right? Or maybe just do, some, fartlek training or something just to change things up. Now, instead of thinking about the heavy legs or instead of thinking about the lack of stamina, now you actually might be thinking about the goal for today. Okay, just sprint to the next mailbox, all right? Then kind of, take a nice easy pace for the next, quarter mile, sprint to that next mailbox, right? And now you're basically shifting your focus, you're changing your focus. So it's off of you, the body, and how you feel, and now it's on to something else. And again, the more you can focus on these external things so you're not maybe overthinking what's happening internally, that might be helpful. And then other days, just realistically, you just need to chalk it up. Today just wasn't my day. Maybe I actually needed an extra day off. And so even though you may not have a great run that day and you felt awful, perhaps you actually learned from that. So when I do a 12-mile run and I felt pretty good, and then 2 days later I go out for a 5-mile run and my legs feel heavy, maybe I need to take an extra day off. So even though this was kind of a crummy run, I actually benefited from that. I learned from that, i.e. the growth mindset, learned from some setbacks, and then perhaps again you take that extra day off, and then you feel much better on that next 12-mile run when you go out 3 days later and do a much shorter run. So Rob, hopefully that helps to answer your question. But again, any follow-ups, again, I'm happy to answer that as well. So the pressure of competing, right? Huge thing, right? In anything you do, right? If you're running, if you are cycling, if you're golfing, whatever you're doing when it comes to competing, there's the pressure of competing. So how you define pressure can really dictate how you perform. And this quote here is from Damian Lillard, who's point guard for the Portland Trailblazers. And this quote actually came literally just over a year ago. He had hit a game-winning shot in the NBA playoffs to actually help his team win a series. I think it was like game 5 or game 6. His team was down 2 points, and he hit like a 35-foot three-pointer as time expired to win the game. And so after the game, the reporters were, the pressure you felt and how did you overcome it, blah, blah, blah. And his comment, I thought, was perfect. He says, pressure, nah. Family, this is just playing ball. Pressure is the homeless man who doesn't know where his next meal is coming from. Pressure is the single mom who is trying to scuffle and pay her rent. We get paid a lot of money to play a game. Don't get me wrong, there are challenges, but to call it pressure is almost an insult to regular people. And, we throw around that term pressure, especially in sport, all the time. And if we think of pressure the way that Damian Lillard looks at it, this is just simply a challenge, right? And am I up to the challenge? Yes. How can I do that? Well, I trust myself. I've put in the time, I've put in the training, I've put in the practice, and I believe, right, that I can succeed, in these challenging situations. And so for those of you that, again, may be running the virtual race, you're going to have, quote unquote, pressure on you. Well, I better finish, or I better do this, or I better do that, and someone's expecting me here. If you think of it as pressure, it can really bring you down. Just think of it as a challenge, and can you rise up to that challenge, right? We all have other real life pressures. This is just simply an athletic challenge that you're choosing to put yourself through. So what are some mental tips we can use for competition day? And again, these tips here, for those of you that are running, this will be really helpful. For those of you that might be out, again, playing golf, cycling, or just doing any other activity in which you are competing, I would say that the number one thing to do, and this is something that I do every day to help me, again, deal with the challenges of any competition, is listen to the Grateful Dead. And there's a reason why I say that, and that will come up in the next slide or two. And so even if you don't have your headphones on, like what I do, I just actually sing the songs to myself. So it's always playing in my head, helps to keep me focused. Next, always have a plan on how you will achieve your goals. It's real easy to say, okay, I want to do this. How? What's the plan, right? When you're out there, how are you going to handle things? So have a plan on how you're going to achieve your goals. Always try to reframe the negative to positive. Things are not always as bad as we may think that they are, right? There's always a positive aspect to it. So try to reframe the negative to a positive. If we're doing something like a marathon, try to break the event into manageable segments, right? It's not 26 miles. It's the first 4, it's the next 4, it's the next 3, it's the next 5, and you just kind of break it down. And once you get through those first 4, you just achieved your goal. I got through the first 4. Now let's focus on the next one, right? So anytime you can break that down, you're playing 18 holes of golf, right? Let's get through the first 3, the next 3, the next 3, and let's not be thinking about the 18th hole on the 7th hole. So we want to break it down into manageable segments. Visualize your performance. Always take the time before the event and even during the event. See yourself doing what you know you're capable of doing out there. Stick to what's familiar, right? And this really speaks to having little routines and rituals, right? I always like to do this before a big run, or I always like to do that while I'm out playing golf, or I like to do this when I'm cycling, or I like to do this when I'm getting ready for a big presentation. Whatever the case may be, stick to what's familiar, because it minimizes like the noise that's out there and helps you focus on task in terms of what you want to do. Make sure you're listening to the Grateful Dead. Again, it's a great way to keep you focused. Prepare for any and all adversity, right? We always hope that the day is perfect. The reality is the day may not be perfect, and it may not necessarily be bad, but adversity will come your way, right? Could be a beautiful day, everything's fine, you're running, everything's great. All of a sudden clouds come over and it rains for 20 minutes. Right? Now you're running in wet shoes and a wet shirt and this and that. How are you going to prepare for any and all adversity? If you have a plan for when something like that happens, it just helps you focus and it helps you overcome that from a mental standpoint. You don't let that one little setback bring you down. You always want to stay focused on the little things that make you great, and make you great at what you do, right? If you're a runner, if you're a golfer, if you're a cyclist, if you're a basketball player, whatever the case may be, stay focused on the little things that make you great, right? You might say, well, but he runs faster than me and she does that better. That's what they do. You want to focus on you and what you do that makes you great at what you do. Believe in yourself and make success happen, right? If you truly believe in what you can achieve, you can make success happen. But it all starts up here in terms of that mindset. And then when the event is done, challenge yourself again. It may not be the same event, right? But it can be something else that's going to push you right towards your perceived limitations, right? And help take you beyond that. So again, always try to find that next challenge. And even when all is said and done and that challenge is done, always try to listen to more Grateful Dead. Again, it's a great way to put a smile on your face. So happiness is running, right? What do we mean by that? So with everything that's been going on the last 4 to 6 months, at least we can kind of get out there and still run, right? So as I like to say, like, the races may be canceled right now, but the training never stops, right? We can still go out, we can still run, and even if you have to do it by yourself versus with your team and all that stuff, you can still go out there. So literally go further every day. And when we say go further every day, mentally, push beyond your perceived limitations, because it can really open your mind to achieve what was once possibly unachievable, right? You never know what you can achieve until you actually go out there and do it. And what you'll notice when you go out to compete, right? If it's a marathon, if it's the PMC challenge, whatever it is, take advantage of the opportunities when you compete, meaning things are going to happen out there. And this quote from a Grateful Dead song, once in a while you get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. You never know what you're going to learn and how you're going to advance yourself, right? If you don't take advantage of the opportunities that are out there. So that essentially wraps up the presentation that I had tonight. As I mentioned on the previous slide, I referenced the Grateful Dead a couple of times. So as you may have gotten the hint, they are a big part of who I am, and it actually led to me writing a book on marathon running, mental training, mental conditioning, with a little piece of the Grateful Dead. So I was basically able to combine both of my passions in life, distance running, and professionally sports psychology, merged it together with Grateful Running. So I'm actually pleased to announce that there's a second edition of my book that actually was just recently released, and I will leave you all with this short little video of the book, and I'll answer your questions. All right, so another question here. Grayson, can you speak to the power of self-talk to get you over a physically challenging experience or a moment of weakness? Yes, great question. So the power of self-talk. So what you say and what you think turns out to be what you actually believe. And one of the misnomers about positive self-talk is like you have to say things like, I'm the greatest and this is that. Sometimes you're never going to actually believe that. So I try to reframe it a little bit into using what I call positive instructional self-talk. So essentially you're trying to tell yourself what you want to do out there, but framing it in a more positive way. So if you have a moment of weakness, whatever that moment is, think about how I can overcome it, right? So let's say you're, running up, one of the hills on Heartbreak Hill, and you're saying to yourself, there's a moment of weakness. Oh, I feel like I'm slowing down and don't stop, and I don't want to stop and don't stop. You're giving yourself a lot of negative instructional self-talk. don't stop, don't stop, don't slow down, right? So we want to reframe that literally into keep going, make it to the top. Keep going, make it to the top. So again, you're not telling yourself you're the fastest person out there, you're the greatest runner of all time, but you're giving yourself some positive instruction in order to get you to where you want to go. So always be aware of your self-talk. You probably don't realize how negative you are just on a day-to-day basis. And that's not a knock against anyone. That's what the research tells us. You know, people tend to be about 60% negative in general in terms of how they think, some even more. So it's actually a skill to remain positive. So if you can become aware of what you're saying to yourself and how you're saying it, again, let's take this back to the first three words: think, feel, run. Change the way you think, change the way you feel, and have more control over the way you're thinking and feeling, and then ultimately how you are performing. Any other questions? No? Well, again, I want to thank you all for taking a little time out of your day. And hopefully, if, as I always like to say after these workshops, if you can take at least one thing out of here and apply it to your daily life, to apply it to your running or whatever it is that you like to do, then I feel that we had success. And just as a gentle reminder again, if you haven't made the suggested $20 donation to Dana-Farber and the Jimmy Fund, please do so. Again, you should have some information in your confirmation email that you received for the presentation tonight, or if not, you should be receiving something via email tomorrow. So again, any questions? Again, hopefully, again, I'm happy to answer. You can certainly get in touch with me just through the website, gratefulrunning.com, or through any of the powers that be at Dana-Farber. And again, I appreciate your time tonight, and may your next run be a grateful run. Thank you.